Welcome back to the Profit Builder. This week in our series on how to plug the profit leaks in your contracting business, I'm going to be sharing with you an interview that I did with Robin, who is an expert in the area of project management and scheduling, and specifically about how do you keep the whole team of, your team, the designer, the architect, the client, how do you keep everybody on the same page and keep projects moving forward efficiently? And in this video, Robin shares some really great resources that are going to help you in terms of how you think about scheduling. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Profit Builder. I'm Vicki Suter, your host, and I am super excited to have my guest, Robin Beacham, with Schedules by Robin here today. Welcome, Robin. Thanks for being a guest on The Profit Builder.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So today, as you could tell by the name of Robin's business, we're going to be talking about project schedules and construction schedules. And Robin, I'm going to let you introduce yourself here in just a second, but Robin's been doing this for a lot of years. And I originally interviewed him probably like 6 years ago on this topic of scheduling and the importance of it. And I just wanted to have him back again and to share with you just how do you really think about and approach scheduling from the perspective of how to have it be that your jobs run smoother, that your team stays more coordinated, you get people to make decisions faster, right? That would all be good, right? Because those are some of the things that you're challenged by as a contractor. And what Robin's going to talk about today is how do you overcome some of those challenges by having good schedules. So before I jump into my questions of you, Robin, would you just introduce yourself, tell people a little bit about you, your background, and then we'll jump in.
Okay. Well, I started in the trades as a laborer back in the early 70s and worked my way up as a carpenter and then a foreman and eventually as a site superintendent, building some large homes and estates for about the last 35 years as a superintendent. Until I decided to retire. And since then, I've been doing scheduling consulting for other contractors who either don't have the skill set or don't have the time and need extra help on their project without dragging down the process in the field. They can bring me on and open up their own labor to do other tasks.
Awesome.
I also train people in scheduling, teaching them how to do it on different software platforms and some of the theory behind construction scheduling, which I don't know that everybody understands necessarily.
Yeah. I love that you do that. Especially that it's an area where maybe you don't need somebody full-time to do it, but you don't have necessarily the expertise. I think it's really great that you help contractors in that way. As a matter of fact, it was a client of mine that referred you as recommended that I interview you for my blog, who just really appreciated and got a ton of value out of using your services. So it was funny this morning. I was meeting with a client and they were talking about this whole topic of scheduling and struggling with getting materials to make sure that they were ordered when they needed to be ordered and they're on time or sub-scheduled. And, he's using an Excel sheet and so on and so forth. And I thought, oh, if he could just be here in this conversation with you and I this afternoon, it would be great value. So I'm excited because I think, as we got to talking about it, I hear this from a lot of people where they really struggle with finding the time to do scheduling and or just that it feels a little bit daunting or I have to use software and, that I don't know and so on and so forth. So I'm just glad to be having this conversation and sharing your wisdom about this with folks because I think that our goal here is to be able to sort of bridge that gap and make it easier for people to be able to do it. So, or just jump in and, and start having better scheduling. So let me ask you this question, like, sometimes I see people who have whiteboards on their walls or they have like, handwritten schedules or they have some sort of schedule in their head or, they're not really using a formal way of putting it in writing. Why is putting scheduling, from your perspective, why is putting scheduling and writing so important?
Well, to start off with, if it's in writing, it's something you can share with the other stakeholders in your project. Uh, it's a document you can refer to when you're defending a delay or a litigation, or just trying to explain to your client or the architect why you need something when you need it. Um, it's not always necessary these days to put it in writing. I'm sending PDF schedules to people who never open it up or never print it out,
Yeah.
but can refer to it anytime they want to on their computer. Um, and having it using a software platform for scheduling makes it actually really easy because it's fluid. It's easy to edit. It's easy to distribute to other people, and easy to update constantly and keep it alive and relevant.
So wait, can you speak to a second about in terms of keeping it alive and keeping it relevant? Because I know that even this person I was talking to this morning was like, yeah, I do it in Excel and it's really a hassle to update it. I'm like, yeah. So how can you just speak to, I think that anyone who uses Excel for scheduling knows that it's a hassle, that it's hard to keep it updated. So maybe instead of talking about that element of it, what's the benefit of using an automated scheduling software, which we'll talk about different kinds in a second, but like what's the, like what are all the things that you can do that are much easier or more automated or quicker to do when you're using a formal scheduling program?
I don't think we have time here to go through all the
All
things you can do.
right,
But,
give me your
but
top.
on a very basic level, when you created a live schedule, changing the date when something's going to happen in your program in your schedule will consequently change all the things that are linked to it downstream. If the windows are going to be a week later than you originally anticipated, it's going to also reschedule the exterior siding and the trim that follows and the paint that goes on your siding after it's put up. Everything will get shifted in time to accommodate that event that had to change the schedule. That's why
Yeah.
it's easy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, in terms of when you talk about scheduling and maybe this would have been a good question to even start with, but there's a thinking about scheduling that I think maybe if you could just share like what your thinking is in terms of like how does schedule help a job flow more easily? And then I'm going to ask you some more questions about a couple, tactical things here, but I think there's a way to think about scheduling that's really, because some people think about it like I saw this in this conversation this morning. Like some people think about it like it's this thing that they have to do for a client or this thing that they have to do for some, like it's this, it shows up as a have to, as opposed to something that really can make a difference in your life as a contractor to make it easier. And so I think that there's a whole thinking about how to look at scheduling and how it can actually be a huge time saver. It can really help you be a better contractor, keep you on track, not lose money on jobs. Like, as you said, the list is long, but maybe can you just speak to that kind of mindset about it and your philosophy about how, because you worked in the trades for so many years, right? You know this, like how it can make your life easier, jobs run more smoothly.
I work with a lot of people who have been doing this for their entire career, not scheduling, but building.
Right.
And they'll tell me, I don't really need a schedule. I've been doing this for decades. I know how to build. I know what comes next. But quite honestly, when we dig into the weeds on their particular project, it becomes clear that they really hadn't thought of every step along the way. They're used to, well, I'm in the site work and excavation phase right now. That's really all I need to think about at the moment. And then it'll move on into framing and through one phase after the other. They know what's involved in that, and they just assume that things are going to run out the way they wanted them to. Uh, when I create initially a schedule, I develop a schedule for a project, I'm literally thinking through the steps that it takes to build that project. And it's there's a basic chain of events from shovel in the ground to the key in the door. But in between, there's a myriad different and unique set of tasks that it takes to get there. I haven't found two projects yet, unless you want to talk about a tract house that are the same from beginning to end. And so I'm coming from a niche in the industry that was hugely customized and specific to a client, and many things hadn't been done before or hadn't been figured out how to make them work before. So there was a lot of challenges, and I really enjoyed those challenges. But back to when I was building this schedule for the project, I digest the drawings and the other construction documents, and then piece together and try and list every single thing that needs to happen on the project. And that can run into the hundreds of line items. But once you've got them down, it's really easy to assign a duration to each one of them and then link them together in a logical way that says this thing has to happen before that thing can happen. And at the end of that process, you've got a schedule that really involves a whole string of little guesses about how long something's going to take. But when you link them all together in a logical way, you now have one big guess that's way more accurate than if you just sat back and guessed what the whole long project was going to take. There was a joke in one office I worked with where when a new set of drawings came in for a new project, the estimator would pick it up, the roll of drawings, heft it, and say, well, I think this is about 18 months. But,
yeah.
And $3 million or whatever.
That's what we call swag estimating and swag schedule. Yeah.
But a whole bunch of little guesses can be really accurate in terms of the big picture compared with trying to guess what the whole thing is.
Yeah.
And then once you've linked everything together, moving anything in there or having it take longer than you thought, it's still can be accommodated. The schedule will adjust to that change, and you don't have to throw that printout away and create a whole new one. The scheduling software will do that for you.
Yeah. So, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking that doing schedules is sort of like, imagine doing a project without, like a big project without a blueprint, without a set of plans, without any schematic of what it is that you're building to. You're trying to, it would be impossible, right?
It would be chaos.
No, total chaos. And I think about, as I was listening to, I was thinking about like when I was training somebody in the early days of my business, and I had to get from what was between my two ears down onto a piece of paper, that I realized that when I codified my thinking, like all those pieces and all those steps and all those processes, that when I codified it and it was no longer in my head, the process of doing all those steps became much easier, because now my head wasn't filled with like having to remember the next thing and the next thing. Like I could just be present with what I was doing, as could the person who I was training also. And so, I'm just listening to you, and it's that thing of, those people who say, yeah, I kind of got all the pieces and parts in my head, but oh my gosh, it would give you so much more peace of mind if you didn't have to keep it all in your head and you had this long list of however many items. But what it allows you to do is to like go, this is what I have to focus on now. And then, oh, this and this and this have to be dealt with. Then I can plan out my week to do that, as opposed to, I'm working 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, just to try to stay in front of all of it.
And always putting out fires and trying to fix things and trying to get something here as fast as possible because we needed it yesterday. To literally be able to let go of the future and focus on the current and know that those other future things are going to be accommodated because you planned for them. And
Right.
there are triggers in the schedule that says you need to order doors by this date or
Right.
order windows by, and the designer has to pick a color by this date, and the owner has to pick out their tile by this date.
Yeah.
You don't have to remember all those things. You put
Yeah.
them in the schedule. I also take my master schedule for a project, and every week or 2 weeks, depending on the project and its complexity and how rapidly it's moving along, print out a 3 week or a 6 week look ahead, which gets rid of all the things that already happened and all the things that are beyond that window you want to look at. And it produces a schedule for the next 3 weeks. And it really lets you just focus on getting those things done correctly and in the right amount of time, the anticipated, in the budgeted time
Yeah.
frame. And know that next week you'll print out another 3 week look ahead
Yeah.
that gather things up.
It's funny. I actually have a formal procedure called a 2 week look ahead that I train people to do and give people that tool to do about. And I always say, like, if your schedule is updated, if you just do this and you do it consistently every single solitary week, especially smaller projects, right? If you do that every week, you're going to stay in front of it and you won't have, you're like, your hair won't be on fire all the time, right? If you can see what's coming in front of you and take appropriate actions today, that won't be the, hair on fire 3 weeks from now or
I had a
emergency.
boss that would refer to his job as flying at 30,000 feet and looking down at things in his business. But altitude, it doesn't have any effect on my project. It's time.
Yeah.
It's all based on time. So
Well, and if you can have an altitude from it, but have, be able to be close enough to what's the actions that have to happen. Right?
yes. So my point was, though, that in some positions, a 3 week look ahead makes sense. In others, on a large estate or something, where you may have 2 or 3 more tiers of foreman, superintendent, and general superintendent, and then each guy has a bigger and bigger window to
Right.
be looking at and working on ahead of time.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, so it was, you were just talking a second ago about when you have a schedule that has all those milestones and deadlines and timeframes on it, that it can keep the homeowner making decisions when they need to, or the architect or the designer. Can you just talk to that? Because that's a big, especially when you're on bigger projects. And I know you and I have had this conversation that in the past about how difficult it is to get everybody making decisions and accountable to delivering on those deadlines when they need to happen in order to get the materials ordered, get it installed, get the schedule to happen, and so on and so forth. So can you just speak to how you have done this management of the team in the past in order to keep everybody accountable? Like what's your set of practices around that?
Well, I start out by creating a construction schedule, a schedule for the actual construction work on the ground. And that's what you're there to do. That's what you're responsible for getting done. However, there's a whole other part of the team, the designer and the architect and the consultants and the client and his, maybe an owner's rep or something, that they all have roles to play that have nothing to do with the construction activities. So I just, like when you build the schedule the relationships you create are downstream looking. In other words, this thing has a predecessor, has to happen before A and before B can be done. But once I've got a construction schedule that I'm happy with, then I build upstream relationships with other offsite activities, like buying out a trade and bringing a contractor under contract to do the roofing or the structural steel or whatever it might be, and then having him produce whatever submittals are required in terms of like shop drawings or mock-ups or samples of his work, that will then be reviewed and ultimately approved by the design team and the engine and his consultants and the owner before you can order that stuff and get it into fabrication, which also still happens off-site for a lot of things before it can get delivered. So that whole stream of activity that happens off-site, I can link backwards from the install date in my construction schedule, so that all those things, if they all take as long as I think they will, or as long as the people have promised me they will, that item will show up on time on my job. And then, so now you've got a drop dead date for the owner to make a decision and the designer to finish designing and the sub to get hired and the shop drawings to get done and the review of them to get done. And if anything takes longer, it potentially has the ability to delay the project. But
So which is a perfect world, right? And what's your, like, if you were to give people like a tip for, all right, here's how I get them to do what they say they're going to do. What's the tip? Like, so like the first step, I get it, is clearly you having a schedule that's outlined. Here's what has to happen in order for us to be on schedule here. This has to happen here. And designer, architect, I need this from you. Homeowner, I need this from you. Sub, I need this from you. Like, there's steps, right? And your schedule outlines that. But how do you get agreement with people? My experience is if we don't have agreement about them being willing to hold to that, then it's just your expectation of them. So
I don't have any teeth in the process. All I can do is keep them accountable for their lack of behavior, of delivery, and let the owner be aware of that process way early on, not letting things drag on and
okay, so how do you do that? Give us a little snippet.
I hope every project out there is having meetings. Not that I'm a fan of meetings in general, but the owner and the architect should be aware of that schedule. It should be part of your meeting every week or every 2 weeks, or perhaps you focus one meeting a month on nothing but the schedule, because it really is an integral part of getting the job done. And if those other actors in the game aren't behaving, they're going to delay the job, and the owner doesn't want to hear that.
So if I hear you correctly, the first step is clearly flesh out the schedule, make sure everybody agrees to the schedule, and then have regular meetings where all the key stakeholders, architect, designer, homeowner, are in the same room with you, and that you get agreement at the end of every meeting about those deliverables that are on the schedule, and when they're not done, that becomes the first agenda item in the next meeting.
That's right. That's right. And the owner is now aware that his architect is not living up to his responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And
the homeowner hasn't agreed to the design that the architect gave him, which is also right. I mean, that happens.
Right. I mean, the homeowner has a huge role to play.
Sure.
The custom home.
Yes, absolutely.
And they're typically the primary cause of delays.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So that's good. I mean, that makes sense. It's a practice of, being not only planning really well, having all those pieces in your schedule, making sure that you've identified all of those predecessors and those things that have to happen before something else can happen, identifying who that person is that's accountable, getting agreement about those deliverables, and then making sure to stay in front of it by keeping on track, having those meetings, communicating about, what's working, not working, and what needs to happen next to get back on schedule, or just to agree that it's going to be later, right?
I've had architects ask me for a schedule that does that at the very beginning of the project, so they can understand what their workload is going to look like. How
Yeah,
many submittals are they going to have to deal with in June and in July and in August?
that's brilliant. Those are
Because
good architects right
they
there.
need to hire more people or
Yes,
lay a couple of them off maybe.
yes. Though
But
that's good. That's really smart. That's really smart.
yes, so but a lot of those same architects still can't live up to their own uh, commitments
Yeah. Yeah.
for their own reasons.
Yes.
But it's you've given the owner a metric that he can look at as the project moves along. And if it's falling behind in the first 2 or 3 months, it'll be obvious to him. Whereas most owners couldn't tell if you're ahead or behind without a schedule, without something to keep monitoring the job
Yeah.
with.
Nice. So for
So
somebody who is newer to scheduling, or somebody who, goes, yeah, I kind of do scheduling, or I do it on a whiteboard, I do it in Excel, or, maybe they're using some program, but they don't necessarily keep it updated. Um, uh, I think that you've really highlighted here what the value of doing scheduling is, right? And why it can be really helpful in terms of helping you stay on in front of a project, what's coming in front of you, plan better, get out of emergency mode, keep the team on schedule, right? And the client. In terms of for somebody who's like looking at like, all right, what's my next step? Like, where do I go from here? How do I even start doing this? What would your advice be as a way to, either, yeah, to get into a more disciplined or practiced way of doing schedules?
well, the first thing is to build a schedule. I've had young guys that I've mentored uh, and told them to go build a schedule for a garden shed or something simple because it still consists of a whole bunch of little steps
Mhm.
and stages, and you can get used to thinking about what they all are and linking them together and how long they might take. A class I attended a long time ago in construction project management uh, talked a lot about scheduling, and he had an exercise called the flat tire schedule, where he scheduled a car driving with an unknown number of occupants in the car, gets a flat tire. What are and what are the steps to getting
Mm.
a flat tire fixed and back on the road again? And how long will each activity take? And what happens before something else can happen? It's got all those linkages to make it work.
That's great. So just start as something really simple. And you talk
Anything
about like a
simple,
shed, but you could even take one small piece of a project. Yeah.
certainly. Yeah, just the kitchen or just the garage or just the site work even. Uh, they all consist of a whole bunch of little steps.
Yeah.
And if you link them all together, you've got a schedule. In terms of the workload, it all happens mostly at the beginning. It might take me dozens of hours sometimes to create a large, complex schedule at the beginning, the development of it, and to get the contractor to buy in and his subcontractors to commit to their role in that schedule. And a lot of times they'll come back and say, "Oh, I need 6 weeks instead of 4 to do that." And so we'll make that adjustment. But at least it's now his schedule and it's his subcontractor's schedule. They've said how long it'll take. Maybe they'll be surprised when they get there and find out it's a lot more complicated than they thought, but it's a learning process for all of us. But at least you're getting what I was going to get to is what do you have to do to keep it alive and keep it active? It takes very little time, actually. The more often you do that, I recommend, like at the end of the day on Fridays, to update your schedule. What happened this week? It's really easy to remember what happened as far
Mhm.
back as Monday on a Friday. But if you're trying to remember 2 weeks and 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, what day the doors showed up or what day the plumber started roughing in. It's hard. You
Yeah,
can go back and hopefully you're keeping those records in your daily project report, but you want to go back and search for all that to bring it all together. But if you sit down and do it weekly, or at the most to every biweekly, uh, it's really easy. And it takes less than half an hour to update a fairly complicated project.
that's great. So that's great practices. And, you know,
It keeps you actively engaged with all the things that
yeah.
should be going on.
Yeah. So I love what you just said too, Robin, which is like that. It's that whole thing of a project that flows better at the back end requires more time at the front end. Like we sometimes, like I see this, and I'm sure you do too, like
Yeah.
we're so busy to like start doing the work. And the
Yeah.
truth is the work will go much smoother if you just invest that time at the front end, in planning, right? And planning the schedule out well. But I think a really important thing that you were just talking about is like that getting agreement with the, you know, like with all the
All the peers.
subcontractors, the
Yeah.
designer, the architect, the homeowner, like getting that agreement about how do we, like, what's the criteria for staying on track with this? How do we make sure that we're successful together as a team? And investing that time at the front end, super important to save you aggravation and heartache at the back end.
And
And
delays at the back end.
and delays, yes, of
Yeah.
course, always that. And then that like weekly practice, I love that. Like just once a week, end of the week on Friday, it's still fresh in your mind. Update the schedule, have that discipline can
Yeah.
really help you to be able to stay in front of what's coming in front of you. And I, you know, I always say to people, it's like when you can see it and you can see what's in front of you, you can do something about it. If you're always looking through the rear view mirror, you're spiraling, right? Or if it's
That's
all
right.
just right here that you have to react to it, you're going to be spiraling. And that's where exhaustion and overwhelm and lost money comes in, and lost days. Yeah. So thank you. Super helpful. And your last tip to people in terms of starting out scheduling is, hey, go start with a small piece. Go do like some small piece, build out a schedule for a shed so that you can get your mind in that pattern of, or maybe even your teacher's example, go change a tire. Like what are the sequence of all those little steps that have to happen so that you can start to think about it. And I love what you were talking about earlier too, of like, once you get it all down, right, then it's there, then it's not in your head anymore.
That's right.
I think, yeah, so awesome. Thank you. This has been great. Any final thing to share? Anything that I should have asked you that I didn't? Any kind of final thing to share with people
Well,
watching, listening?
yes, we just touched on the word delays, and they happen for all
Mm.
sorts of reasons. But I've made it a point, a practice to include delays in my projects when they happen, whether it's a rain delay or your truck full of windows gets involved in an accident and they're toast. There's a delay. You didn't cause it, but or a permit delay or something like that.
Mhm.
I create a new line in my schedule for that event, and it has a start date. That's when it first occurred, or when you first discovered that the joists are rotten under this floor, and you're going to have to replace all the floor joists in the house. That's a discovered condition. Nobody was signed up for that piece of work at the beginning of the project. The homeowner may not have known about it. The architect didn't show it in his drawings, and you didn't pick it up until the floor was uncovered.
Right.
So I'll create a delay activity for that starts the day you uncovered the rotten joists, and it ends when you're able to start all the impacted activities that were held up while you had to deal with that. And that may include estimating the costs of the repair or replacement of those joists and getting that approved as a change order before you can start replacing them. And so there's 3 or 4 steps to a delay even that you
Right.
may or may not
Mhm.
have the interest in elaborating in your schedule, but at least you've got a start date and that delay is called out and described in your schedule. And you've got an end date when that delay was mitigated and you're able to get back on track with your job. And
And
that
then
will
that pushes everything else out, right?
what's that?
And then you putting that in there with an end date then pushes, and it's the
It pushes everything that was impacted by it. There may be other activities on the project that can go ahead because your windows are there. You can put the roof on anyway, but
Right.
something will be impacted. And it's hard to tell unless you've got you're using a computer software program that easily can show you the critical path through your schedule. If something that's delayed isn't on the critical path, theoretically, it won't impact the final completion date of the project. But it could, if it's delayed long enough, it will become the critical path on the job.
Right.
So I put delays up there in the top of the schedule under a summary called delays, and I keep them there for the entire project. And that way the owner can't forget
Yeah,
that
brilliant.
he forgot to deliver that thing when he said it would. It stays
Yeah,
there.
including not making decisions in time or delays.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And it keeps everybody on the same page about what are the, like, we had a set of agreements at the beginning. We had a set of expectations based on that, and understanding how all those items impacted ultimately how long it took the job to finish. Yeah.
Right.
And the cost oftentimes.
Yes, because time is money.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. People think, well, it costs me the same amount of money. No, if it takes longer, it costs you more money.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
Been fun.
Huh?
This has been fun.
It has been. I love this conversation. I just got to, as I was listening to you, any software recommendations? I mean, I know anymore there's a lot of software out there that does scheduling, but
there's yeah, Smart Sheets and a bunch of it. Merlin is a good program. I've used Microsoft Project now for a long time. It's really hugely capable.
So Microsoft Project, Merlin, and Smart Sheets are a couple that you know of that.
Yeah, Smart Sheets is trying. There's some quasi software scheduling programs out there that will do very basic things.
Okay.
But they've got a lot of limitations.
Okay. Okay. Well, so people can obviously go research them and find out, based on where they're at, where they might want to start. I used to teach software long ago and far away at the beginning of my business. And, I would go into companies and they would be like, oh, we're going to start doing this. We're going to start doing this. And the software is going to be perfect because we're going to do change orders better. Or we're going to do estimating, or we're going to do scheduling. And after I done this for about 6 months, I was like, oh, I see. If they don't have the practice for doing that manually, software will not magically have them know how to do change orders or scheduling or estimating. Like, the software isn't the thing there's nothing magical about software, right? So having that understanding, which is why I appreciate us having this conversation, but that understanding of how do you do scheduling and how do you think about scheduling, and maybe even starting out with something really simple, but get your brain to start thinking through, like you were talking about, like build a shed, change a tire, start thinking through, in terms of what are all those pieces. All right. Thank you, Robin. This has been awesome. I really appreciate it. If people want to reach you, can you tell them, and maybe they want training, maybe they want you to do scheduling for them, whatever, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, I have a website called Schedules by Robin. You can go there, and there's contact info there, and get in touch with me.
Awesome.
I do training over Zoom for contractors who've got half a dozen superintendents that want to up their skill set in scheduling. I mentor people here locally in the Bay Area, and yeah, most of my projects are here in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay, so people can get a hold of you and get in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, on Zoom or whatever, do a session maybe. Well, I will include that in the show notes here, and people can reach out to you if they need to. Again, thank you for being a guest on the Profit Builder. And for all you watching and listening, I hope that you have found this hugely helpful and valuable, and maybe picked up some tools and tips about how to have scheduling work better for you in managing and running your projects. And thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Profit Builder. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Robin and this video about scheduling. And ideally, you walked away with maybe some great ideas and tips that will help you in terms of managing projects and project teams, using scheduling as a resource and a way to be able to do that. And in next week's video will be the last video in our series about how to plug the profit leaks in your contracting business. And we're going to be talking about cost to complete in my interview with my client, Aaron, about how doing that completely transformed his business and allowed him to be consistently more profitable in his company. So I look forward to seeing you then.